Hi, I'm Phil Harbottle, and this is my 56th video discussing British science fiction. In this video, I'm continuing a new series of more personal reflections, particularly concerning science fiction comic strips. My own first completed strip of The First Man in the Moon, discussed in my last video, might well have remained a one-off, but for the fact that I just left my old school, having passed my 11 plus, and had commenced attending Wallsend Grammar School. Many of my new school friends were also great fans of Dan Dare and read the Eagle comic each week. This intensified my own obsession with the strip. Earlier, when a new fourth adventure, Operation Saturn, had commenced in the Eagle in late February 1953, I'd resolved to clip out the two-sided front page strip, clip it out, and save it each week in a sturdy prong binder. So now I had a reference file of the Operation Saturn story, saved reference file. Previously, I'd fallen victim to the schoolboy's burden of having my comics thrown out and destroyed at the end of each week by my house-proud mother. So I had no copies or any memories of the first three Dan Dare adventures before February 1953. But now I had a file of Operation Saturn. And by endlessly rereading and studying the artwork, my own drawing abilities were considerably enhanced, not least because art was now one of my new school subjects. Eventually, I was inspired to draw my own first Dan Dare strip, The Mekon's Returns, commencing around December 1953. I was just turned 12 years old and had yet to discover science fiction books. So not surprisingly, my comic was a weird and wonderful makeup of story elements and scenes from earlier comics I had read. But here and there were touches of originality as I made up the story as I went along. Now, I'd heard the popular song Blue Moon, which sparked the thought of how the moon might actually turn blue. This in turn triggered memories of the second Dan Dare story, The Red Moon Mystery, with its locust-like alien insect invaders. What if myriads of blue alien killer insects were to be assembled on the moon by the villainous Mekon? And so I had my first chapter, The Day the Moon Turned Blue. Then, as I was finishing the first chapter of the story, near Christmas, my Christmas presents had included the third Eagle Annual with a Dan Dare strip set on Venus, the double-headed eagle. We see it there, the double-headed eagle. By adapting and reworking some of the Operation Saturn and Eagle annual artwork into my own story, I could create something new. The next chapter was The Revolt on Venus, which was inspired by that panel. You can see the comparison. I inspired that. And my following chapter the Mekon's last stand was also inspired by the story. You see the panels there? That panel and this panel here, and the tree in there. So that served as inspiration for my own original story. Now I followed that story, quickly followed it with another original story there. In April 1954, Planet X, a wandering world on a collision course with the Earth. This was another scheme of the Mekon, foiled by Dan Day. That's that one. The Mekon returned in my next story. No, sorry, there was one after that. The next story wasn't a Mekon story. It was a story I called The Time Travellers from Nassau in April 1954. Now this story was based on a story idea I'd just read in the Marvel Man comic, which itself was a plagiarism from a Captain Marvel story. See my first video for how they were connected. Now I was also able to adapt some of the artwork from the Operation Saturn story. Here. Oh. I've lost the references. Anyway, you get the idea. They were the story. They were the panels that were adapted from that. Now, I did follow that story up with this story, which I want to look at in more detail. The Mekon returned in my July 1954 story, The Atomic Asteroid. This weird and wonderful story was my own highly original take on atomic power menacing the Earth. The story opens with the Mekon and his renegade trains cruising in the asteroid belt. When instruments detect radioactivity on a large asteroid, the Mekon decides to land and investigate. He finds that the asteroid has an atmosphere and is inhabited. On page 2, the primitive natives are used as slave labour by the Mekon to help them construct special machinery and an atomic plant. On page 3, which we'll see there, the Mekon's scheme is outlined to transmit an atomic beam which will surround the Earth in a shell of atomic energy. This will act as a barrier, destroying any spaceships attempting to land or leave. You see there on page 4. As the Earth is dependent on receiving food supplies from Venus, in 6 months the Earth will be starving and at the Mekon's mercy. On Venus, a trained scientist invents a special new metal. Spaceships coated with it will be able to pass safely through the ray barrier. He notifies Governor Sonder of his discovery, and Sonder hastens to his laboratory to assess its potential. Sonder is impressed and orders a fleet of spaceships to be coated with the new metal. Sonder himself then flies to Earth in the first ship to be readied. En route, he contacts President Kalon of the Therons to see if they have discovered the origin of the ray barrier. There's Kalon there. Kalon tells him that since the known planets were not responsible, he believes the answer must lie somewhere in the asteroid belt, which is unexplored. Sonder then lands at Space Fleet HQ and confers with Sir Hubert Guest and Dan Day. Dan agrees to join Sonder to explore the asteroid belt. They're joined by Digby, and on reaching the belt, they approach a large asteroid where Digby spots a strange dome on the surface. They deduce that it must be artificial, and judging by the lack of craters on its surface, the asteroid must have an atmosphere. But before they can make any tests, the ship is struck by a wandering asteroid. Glancing blow. The collision knocks out their instruments for detecting atmospheric conditions, and unaware that the air is radioactive, their rocket jets cause a small chain reaction, and the ship is blown by explosions down to the surface. Sonder's ship crashes into a shallow lake, its nose wedged in the deep mud at the bottom. But Sonder manages to get the craft upright again and free of the mud. Then Sonder ejects the fuel from its tanks, which causes the ship to float to the surface. And wearing spacesuits, they're able to swim ashore. As they swim ashore, the native who's observed them fetches armed warriors from his village. The natives capture Dan. They take Sonder captive, but they leave Dan and Digby alone. And Dan and Digby follow them, waiting their chance to rescue Sonder later. And he certainly needs rescuing. In the village, Sonder is about to be executed by spears as the natives chant, "Death to the green men." But with his paralyzing pistol, Dan is able to effect his rescue, and they escape into the hills. Dan astutely realizes that the natives must have been seeking revenge against Treens, working out that the Mekon must be here on the asteroid and maltreating the natives. After returning to the ship for food and rest, they set out through the hills to locate the mysterious dome and encounter a miniature railway with a chain of automatic trucks loaded with metallic ore. Which Sonder quickly deduces the ore to be plutonium and uranium, the main constituents of the ray barrier. Digby deduces that it must be being taken to an atomic plant somewhere to be processed as a ray by the Mekon. Digby advocates that they should sabotage the operation, and in true comic book style, Dan just happens to have a bomb with him. So he explodes a rock which blocks the line, derailing the trucks following behind him. Their own truck continues along the line until the dome comes in sight, and they notice that there are also another 2 domes. Now, looking at my strip now, I'm amused to see that I contrived to adapt some Alfred Bestel artwork from my young sister Valerie's 1951 Rupert Annual. Rupert's story, The Elephant Bell, in the annual, was the inspiration for much of my artwork in this particular sequence. Now, just have a look. Here we see Rupert's Underground Railway. And also the weather control machinery. So now then, on the next sequence, after cheerfully sending a couple of train workers to their deaths, for which I blame my exposure to horror comics, Dan's party reaches the control room, and they set about sabotaging it. Now here we see some nifty machinery. See that machinery there, which was inspired by Alfred Bestel. See the resemblance. Digby conveniently discovers some hand grenades in a cache in the control room, and they use it to set about sabotaging everything, blowing it up. They blow up the control room. Not only machinery is blown up either. Let's see, bits of trains being exploded there. Sad evidence of my exposure to American horror comics. The atomic plant is completely destroyed along with its technicians. Meanwhile, in one of the other domes, the Mekon learns of their depredations and orders them to be hunted down and brought to him alive. Now, for the climax of this story, I was moved to experiment with using water paints for this sequence instead of crayons. As we see here, I was able to use my own very limited real-life experience to progress the plot. As a small boy, I regularly played street football outdoors, and we often kicked our football high up onto the flat roof of the Co-op bakery on Wilson Street, Wall's End. With the fearless stupidity of youth, I became adept at shinning up the drain pipe, fully 30 feet into the air, climbing to the roof to retrieve and throw down the ball. Then with 2 hands, hang off the edge of the roof, blindly feeling with my foot for a foothold on the top bracket, affixing the drain pipe to the wall. I'd let go one hand and clutch for the pipe and then climb backwards down the pipe. Using my technique, Dan Day is able to remain free when Sondor and Digby are captured by the Mekon's men. Watching from cover, Dan overhears the Mekon's new plan to imperil the Earth. New special trained spacecraft have been designed that can now pass through in the ray barrier and are equipped to suck in atomic energy and redistribute it in the form of a heat ray. The Mekon reveals that the heat rays will be trained on the poles to melt the ice caps, flooding the world, unless the Earth gives in to his rule. Thereafter, the heat rays can be turned on the floodwaters and evaporate them. What is left of the depleted ray barrier can be dissipated by switching off the gravity lock, keeping it in place. Here we see the Mekon's plan in action. Melting the ice caps. Dan Day then emerges from hiding and his surprise attack gains him control. The Mekon is forced at gunpoint to tell his fleet to call off the attack and dry up the floodwaters, and then await the Mekon himself joining them. The gravity lock for the ray barrier is destroyed. The excitement over, I now reverted to crayon colouring. The ships obey the order and the floodwaters are evaporated. Holding the Mekon captive, Dan and co then back out of the room, only to fall victim to a tripwire, and the Mekon escapes. Dan and co escape in a trained spacecraft, while the Mekon, realizing he is beaten, escapes into space with his remaining men and ships. Dan's ship then blasts the Mekon's base before heading for Earth. Here we see Dan working out his cunning plan of having Sondor contact the Mekon's ships on Earth by radio, impersonate the Mekon's voice with my version of the bloodthirsty Digby standing by on the guns. Impersonating the Mekon's voice, Sondor tells the Mekon's ships to gather around his craft, and then Digby ruthlessly blasts them all to bits. My story ends on the classic cliche of many juvenile comics. Now for 28 days leave, bags of kip and bags of grub. Some hope dig, another job's bound to turn up, it always does. Then, in the autumn of 1954, my family acquired a new high-quality radio rental system, Rediffusion, a sort of radio precursor to Sky, whereby homes installing it could receive all 3 BBC radio stations, Home, Light and Third Programme, but also Radio Luxembourg. The latter, broadcast from Europe on 208 meters medium wave, was very difficult to pick up on ordinary radio sets. The reception was awful. Radio Luxembourg transmitted their own original serialized stories of Dan Day, Monday through Friday, in 15-minute episodes from July 1951 until March 1956, until 1955 when they ran repeats. I myself only had a crystal set made for me by my father and had been unable to follow the radio serial, though I was aware of it. I'd only heard tantalising snatches against the background of static. But now, on Rediffusion, I could suddenly clearly hear and follow the Dan Day serials for the first time. And here we see the result. I was so enthused that I made handwritten notes of the content every night, getting down snatches of actual dialogue and a summary of the stories. With the episodes still fresh in my mind, I then created my own hand-drawn, then inked and colour crayoned comic strips of the radio serials. Executed in large paper drawing books, which we see some of them here. All transcribed from the radio serial. Between September 1954 and around May 1956, I managed to transcribe hundreds of pages of no less than 4 long complete stories and a good half of another 3 stories that I was forced to abandon halfway through because of deteriorating radio reception. Now, what's the significance of this? Well, there were over 500 episodes of the serial broadcast between 1951 and 1956, but apart from just 2 episodes, poor quality private tape recordings, they've all been lost. The show had been recorded on a master disc, but that master has long ago been lost, or more likely destroyed. The entire radio series has been lost. So, my own strips are the only reliable record, a reliable detailed record of what many of the stories were about. We'll take a closer look at them in my next video.